He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. Friedrich Nietzsche.
There are people who dominate by force, and there are those who dominate by reflection. The first kind needs armies, titles, or laws. The second needs only presence, the ability to hold up a mirror so perfect that others can no longer hide from what they are. Most power in the world depends on illusion. Men build reputations, institutions, and empires out of fragile stories about themselves. Stories that must never be interrupted. They surround themselves with confirmation, with voices that agree, with mirrors that distort in flattering ways. The longer those illusions stand, the stronger the person appears. But it takes only one clear reflection to bring the entire image down. The mirror effect has nothing to do with imitation or flattery. It is the discipline of holding your composure long enough to let others confront themselves. It works because people cannot separate the world from their own reflection. When their anger, pride, or deceit bounces back at them unaltered, they cannot process it as your doing. They feel attacked by themselves. They try to argue and realize their own tone is echoing in the air. They push harder and meet only resistance shaped exactly like them. In time, confusion becomes rage, not at you, but at what you make them see. The mirror effect is not passive. It is deliberate restraint. It requires the control to absorb, to repeat, to remain still when provoked. To reflect an opponent accurately, you must erase your ego. It is not your reaction that wins. It is their overreaction. Human psychology was built around recognition. From birth, the infant reads faces, mimics gestures, and learns who it is by what it sees in return. We never outgrow that mechanism. In politics, we crave affirmation of our righteousness. In relationships, we seek reflection of our worth. And in every conflict, we secretly want the other side to validate our identity. Even in hatred, the mirror effect exploits this dependence. By reflecting your adversary's tone, method, or reasoning, you force them into a confrontation with their own identity. A confrontation most people spend their entire lives avoiding. This is why some of history's calmest figures were also its most dangerous. They did not attack. They waited. They let the arrogant talk themselves into traps, the violent expose their own brutality, the hypocrite reveal his double standard in his own words. Socrates, Diogenes, Gandhi, three names that appear gentle on the surface, yet each mastered the same psychological precision. They refused to be drawn into the opponent's rhythm. They became the rhythm. A man like Socrates could destroy reputations without raising his voice. Diogenes could dismantle the entire theater of Athenian pride by a single act of imitation. Gandhi could unmask an empire's cruelty by mirroring it with his own vulnerability. Each knew the same truth: when the powerful are forced to see themselves, they unravel. The mirror effect is both defensive and offensive. It protects you by giving the enemy nothing to strike. It destroys them by reflecting their strikes back at them. No weapon, no army, no wealth, only perception. But perception, handled correctly, is enough to unseat kings. That is the essence of Law 44. To reflect, not react. To stand still until the opponent loses sight of who is who. To win without movement, without noise, without leaving fingerprints. Socrates was the first great master of this craft. Not because he sought power, but because his very nature threatened it. He held up the mirror of reason to a society addicted to its own eloquence, and they could not bear the sight. Athens in the 5th century before Christ was a city addicted to sound. Every public square, every portico, every shaded corner of the agora vibrated with the rhythm of debate. To be eloquent was to be powerful. A man could rise from obscurity to prominence by the force of his speech alone. If he could convince, he could rule. Rhetoric was currency, and truth was a matter of performance. The sophists, self-proclaimed teachers of wisdom, sold arguments the way merchants sold olives. Polished, practiced, and profitable. Socrates entered that world like a mirror dropped into a market of smoke. He had none of the qualities Athens admired. No beauty, no wealth, no charm. He walked barefoot, wore the same rough cloak through every season, and lived among the working class of the city. He did not write, did not lecture, and claimed to know nothing. Yet by doing so, he exposed everyone who pretended to know everything. His method was simple and merciless. He would approach a politician, a poet, a general, or any man who claimed to possess knowledge, and begin with what seemed like curiosity. He praised them for their expertise, then asked them to explain it. As they spoke, he listened quietly, gently asking for clarification. Each question sounded innocent, yet it forced the speaker to define his words, to examine his assumptions. Soon, the proud man found himself contradicting his own logic. The audience, passers-by, merchants, young students, would begin to laugh, not out of cruelty but recognition. They saw in that moment how fragile certainty could be. Socrates rarely offered his own opinion. He claimed he had none. He only sought to understand, but his understanding worked like acid, slow, precise, and impossible to defend against. When he asked, "What is courage?" the soldier's reply dissolved under scrutiny. When he asked what is justice, the politician's fine words collapsed into hypocrisy. The mirror did not attack, it revealed. And revelation in a city built on pride was intolerable. To those who admired him, Socrates represented the freedom of thought, the refusal to accept empty wisdom. To those who feared him, he was a threat to order itself. His questions did not simply challenge individuals, they challenged the entire foundation of Athenian confidence. If no one could define virtue, what became of morality? If every argument could be reversed, what became of truth? The sophists taught that persuasion was power. Socrates proved that reflection was stronger. Over time, the laughter that followed his exchanges turned into resentment. Those he humiliated in public, statesmen, poets, generals, carried their anger quietly. When Athens lost the Peloponnesian War, the city turned inward, looking for someone to blame. They saw in Socrates the embodiment of everything that had gone wrong. The endless questioning, the moral doubt, the corrosion of traditional values. His association with Alcibiades, the ambitious general accused of betrayal, made him a convenient target. And so the charges came, corrupting the youth, disrespecting the gods, undermining the fabric of the city. At his trial, Socrates stood before the assembly without fear, without defense lawyers, without apology. He spoke calmly, even mockingly, refusing to flatter his judges. He told them that he was a gadfly, a necessary irritant to keep the city awake. He offered no compromise, no plea for mercy. He turned the trial itself into another dialogue. One last mirror held before the conscience of Athens. In condemning him, the city condemned its own reflection. The sentence was death by hemlock. In his final hours, surrounded by his students, Socrates remained composed. He discussed philosophy until the poison reached his heart. No spectacle, no last speech, no display of fear. He turned even his death into an act of quiet resistance. By accepting it, he left Athens with an image it could never erase. The calm man dying for the right to question. What made Socrates dangerous was not rebellion but restraint. He never shouted, never imposed, never fought. He simply reflected. His power lay in stillness, in the refusal to react emotionally when others expected it. He allowed the opponent's words to circle back and strike their own speaker. Every politician who debated him walked away defeated, though Socrates had offered no argument. Every proud man who faced him left diminished, not because Socrates had won, but because they had exposed themselves. The mirror effect begins here in its purest form. Intellectual reflection is psychological combat. When the aggressor meets no hostility, only calm inquiry, the balance shifts. The one who questions controls the frame. The one who defends loses control of the narrative. The one who remains still defines the rhythm of the conflict. Socrates proved that silence, timing, and precision of reflection can unsettle even the most powerful minds. He left no books, no doctrine, no physical legacy. Only a method passed through the minds of those he had once disarmed. His enemies thought they had erased him. Instead, they carried his reflection inside them. It lingered in their speeches, in their justifications, in their need to defend themselves against a dead man. The mirror remained. If Socrates used dialogue to expose illusion, Diogenes shattered it through behavior. He lived a century later in a Greece that had grown more sophisticated, more performative, and more corrupt. The age of rhetoric had matured into the age of appearance. Philosophy itself had become a career. Teachers sold virtue to the rich, promising wisdom as a kind of luxury. Diogenes saw this and refused to participate. He made his life a weapon, a mirror so blunt and direct that it insulted the world merely by existing. He owned almost nothing: a cloak, a staff, a small jar that served as his home. When he saw a child drinking water from cupped hands, he threw away his bowl. When someone asked him why he lived like a dog, he said that dogs are the only honest creatures left. They bark at their enemies and wag their tails at their friends. He embraced that insult, kynikos, dog-like, and turned it into the birth of an entire school of philosophy. Cynicism. Athens admired wit, but Diogenes didn't play for admiration. He provoked. He wandered the city in daylight holding a lantern, saying he was searching for an honest man. He relieved himself in public, mocked conventions, and insulted men of reputation to their faces. He violated every rule of decorum not for attention, but to show how fragile those rules were. When someone asked why he begged for food, he replied, "I'm teaching generosity." Each act was deliberate. A mirror held up to a society that pretended to be virtuous while living for approval. To understand Diogenes is to see that his cruelty was never random. He didn't hate people, he hated pretense. He understood that human beings would rather maintain hypocrisy than confront it. They feared ridicule more than truth. So he used ridicule as truth's delivery system. Where Socrates made people question their reasoning, Diogenes made them question their lives. He became the embodiment of discomfort, not through philosophy but through example. The most famous confrontation of his life came when Alexander the Great visited Corinth. The young conqueror, already legend in his own time, had heard of the strange philosopher who lived in a barrel and insulted kings. He sought him out, curious and amused. He found Diogenes resting in the sun and stood before him surrounded by soldiers and attendants. Alexander greeted him with courtesy and asked if there was anything he could do for him. Diogenes didn't stand, didn't bow, didn't perform. He looked up and said, "Yes. Step out of my sunlight." The words traveled through Greece like a thunderclap. In a single sentence, the beggar had equalized himself with the emperor. Alexander, to his credit, did not order his death. He laughed and said, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." To which Diogenes replied, "If I were not Diogenes, I would still wish to be Diogenes." That exchange revealed the essence of the mirror effect. Alexander ruled the world through conquest. Diogenes ruled him through indifference. He had nothing to gain, nothing to lose, and that made him untouchable. The mirror Diogenes held up was not verbal. It was existential. He reflected back to society the emptiness behind its desires. When people laughed at him, they exposed their own discomfort. When they mocked his poverty, they revealed their dependence on possessions. When they called him mad, they showed how little they understood freedom. Every insult became proof of his point. He didn't resist judgment, he invited it. He made people reveal themselves by the way they reacted to him. Power cannot tolerate what it cannot seduce or intimidate. Diogenes belonged to neither category. He needed nothing from anyone and therefore could not be bought, flattered, or threatened. That independence terrified the powerful more than open rebellion, because rebellion can be crushed, detachment cannot. He offered no ideology, no army, no movement to suppress, only a mirror that reflected the greed, vanity, and fear of those around him. Even when his actions seemed obscene, they were deliberate statements about human hypocrisy. He begged from statues to show how pointless begging was. He mocked rich men for being slaves to reputation while claiming to be free. He lived in filth to prove that virtue had nothing to do with comfort. Every society creates its own Diogenes, the one person willing to puncture its illusions. But such people are rarely loved. They are tolerated while they amuse, despised when they expose too much. The Athenians laughed at Diogenes because laughter was safer than reflection. Yet the laughter never erased him. His shadow stretched across generations, influencing Stoicism, early Christianity, and every later philosophy that prized integrity over display. The power of Diogenes lies in his refusal to perform the part others assigned him. He forced the world to deal with what it really was, not what it pretended to be. When a man like that appears, the rest of society reacts like a body rejecting a foreign object. But in that reaction, the truth becomes visible. That is the provocation of reflection. To live so honestly that the dishonest are exposed merely by being near you. Diogenes proved that mirroring need not be polite. It can be confrontation in its rawest form, the refusal to bend, the refusal to flatter, the refusal to fear. Socrates disarmed through calm reason, Diogenes disarmed through scorn. Both made men see themselves and both paid a price for it. Because no matter the era, no one forgives the man who makes them face their own reflection. By the 20th century, the theater of power had changed. Empires no longer fought only with swords and catapults. They fought with image, law, and moral justification. The British Empire called itself a civilizing force, a rational, enlightened power guiding the world toward order. It could conquer, but it had to believe itself benevolent. That illusion was essential. Without it, the empire could not justify its rule to itself. Mahatma Gandhi understood this long before his opponents did. He began not as a saint, but as a lawyer, trained in London, dressed in Western suits, and fluent in the language of the empire. He knew the logic of British governance, its obsession with decorum and legitimacy. He recognized that the empire's greatest vulnerability was not military but moral. It needed to believe it was right. Gandhi made that belief his target. He didn't confront the British with violence, he confronted them with their own ideals. He turned their moral vocabulary into a weapon, one that required no armies, only discipline. His concept of satyagraha, truth force, was a form of strategic mirroring. It was not passive submission, it was deliberate reflection. When British law demanded obedience, he obeyed publicly until the moment came to violate it calmly and accept the punishment. Each arrest, each beating, each humiliation became a mirror image of the empire's cruelty. The more brutal the response, the clearer the reflection. He refused to hate, refused to strike back, refused to descend into the same rage that animated his oppressors. In doing so, he turned the British conscience against itself. Colonial power depends on dehumanization. The ruler must convince himself that the ruled are lesser, irrational, dangerous, childlike. Violence only works when it can be rationalized as necessary. Gandhi's genius was to deny that rationalization. His followers marched unarmed into batons and bullets, eyes open, bodies undefended. Each fall, each broken bone was a message. This is what your civilization looks like when it is stripped of its words. The image traveled farther than any speech could. The world saw not rebellion but exposure. An empire that claimed to uphold law and justice was shown flogging men for the crime of standing still. The mirror Gandhi held up was not physical but moral. He forced the British to see the contradiction between their ideals and their behavior. The longer they ruled, the clearer the contradiction became. His defiance was quiet but relentless. It robbed the empire of narrative control. Newspapers, diplomats, and ordinary citizens in Britain began to ask the same uncomfortable question. If we are just, why must justice look like this? That question, once planted, cannot be erased. Gandhi's method required inhuman patience. He knew that reflection takes time to corrode illusion. For years he endured imprisonment, public mockery, and the doubts of his own followers, who often begged him to abandon nonviolence. He refused, not out of moral pride, but because the entire strategy depended on consistency. If the mirror cracks even once, the oppressor escapes. Violence from the oppressed would have reaffirmed the empire's story. That force was necessary to maintain order. By denying that narrative, Gandhi removed the empire's moral footing piece by piece. Every strike the British delivered returned to them magnified. Each act of repression deepened the reflection. The empire, which had once defined itself through control, began to look like a machine of senseless cruelty. In the end, it wasn't defeated by war or revolution, but by exhaustion, a psychological collapse born from its own reflection. The British could govern India by power, but they could not live indefinitely with the image Gandhi held before them. After independence, Gandhi's image hardened into something else: the saint, the father of the nation, the symbol of virtue. But that was not the essence of his power. He was not a mystic detached from the world. He was a strategist who understood that in politics, perception is the final battlefield. He controlled perception by refusing to fight on any other front. His mirror was clean because it was disciplined. He offered no hatred for hatred to grip, no aggression for aggression to justify itself against. The strength of Gandhi's reflection lay in the restraint behind it. He proved that moral exposure can be more destructive than armed revolt. He used the same law that bound him to unbind his oppressors. He never shouted for the downfall of the British Empire. He simply showed it what it had become. And that sight, more than rebellion, more than sabotage, was what made it crumble. Gandhi's strategy revealed the full range of the mirror effect. Socrates used reflection to unravel arrogance in thought. Diogenes used it to ridicule hypocrisy in behavior. Gandhi used it to collapse an empire's self-image. The principle was the same in all three. The mirror is not a shield, but a silent form of attack. It requires patience, composure, and a deep understanding of human self-deception. It wins not by overpowering, but by overexposing. In the end, the British left, and India became free. Yet the mirror Gandhi held up remains relevant because it reveals something permanent in human nature: the inability to face our own reflection for long. Every person, every institution, every government carries within it an image of itself, an image that must be protected at all costs. Expose that image to truth and the structure begins to tremble. Gandhi's gift to history was not merely independence. It was a demonstration that truth, when reflected with discipline, can unmake even the most confident illusion of power. Every confrontation contains two battles. The first is visible: arguments, weapons, votes, demonstrations. The second is invisible: the struggle to define reality itself. Whoever controls perception wins both wars. The mirror effect belongs to that second domain. It does not alter events directly. It alters the meaning of events until the aggressor finds himself trapped inside his own narrative. What Socrates, Diogenes, and Gandhi discovered independently is that people cannot endure the sight of their own contradictions. They build elaborate systems to avoid them: laws, customs, reputations, ideologies. Expose those contradictions too suddenly and the reaction is always the same. Denial first, anger next, collapse eventually. The mirror effect accelerates that process. It works not by persuasion but by repetition. You take what your opponent gives and return it unchanged. If he is arrogant, you let him hear his arrogance echoed back. If he is violent, you let his violence display itself without opposition. If he is deceitful, you repeat his words until the deceit becomes visible. 3 elements make the technique effective. 1. The control of emotion reflection requires stillness. The moment you react, you stop reflecting and start participating. That was Socrates' advantage. He kept his tone steady while others lost theirs. Emotion is noise, the mirror works only in silence. In negotiation, debate, or conflict, the one who maintains calm forces the other to fill the silence with self-justification. Each word they add becomes more revealing than the last. This is why political interrogators, skilled negotiators, and quiet strategists often achieve more through patience than through aggression. Silence provokes exposure. 2. The precision of imitation. To mirror effectively, you must be exact. Too much exaggeration becomes mockery. Too little loses the resemblance. Diogenes mastered this balance through gesture rather than argument. He didn't lecture the rich for their greed. He behaved greedily in parody of them, begging without shame, living in public as they lived in private. He took their habits and amplified them just enough to reveal the absurdity. Modern versions of this tactic appear everywhere, from political satire to protest movements. The copy that embarrasses because it is too accurate. Imitation has always been more subversive than confrontation because it uses the opponent's own image as evidence. 3. The moral reversal. The most sophisticated mirror turns power's justification against itself. Gandhi's nonviolence did exactly that. He made British legality a theater of self-exposure. Every flogging, every arrest performed before the world's eyes as proof of Britain's own hypocrisy. Moral mirrors are dangerous because they strip authority of legitimacy. Once a regime is forced to argue that cruelty is necessary, it begins to lose the argument with itself. The public may not immediately revolt, but confidence drains away, and power built on self-righteousness withers first from within. Behind these 3 elements lies a deeper psychological truth. People do not fear being wrong as much as they fear being seen as wrong. The mirror effect weaponizes that fear. When someone realizes that their behavior, once hidden, now defines them in the eyes of others, they experience a loss of narrative control. It is not the opponent's attack that destroys them. It is their own reflection reframed in public light. That is why exposure through debate, journalism, or personal confrontation often provokes disproportionate fury. The fury is the sound of identity cracking. The law therefore serves 2 purposes. It is a shield. By giving nothing new to strike, you conserve your energy and let the aggressor spend his. And it is a sword. By letting him reveal himself, you turn his actions into your evidence. In politics, this might mean repeating an adversary's statements verbatim until their contradictions accumulate. In personal life, it can mean responding to hostility with calm repetition, forcing the aggressor to witness his own tone. In negotiation, it may mean adopting the other party's logic to the point of absurdity, guiding them to refute themselves. The mirror effect also carries danger. To hold it too long can consume the one who holds it. Socrates paid with his life, Diogenes with exile and ridicule. Gandhi with assassination. Those who use reflection as a weapon often underestimate how intolerable truth can be once it appears. Exposure breeds resentment, and resentment searches for targets. When people can no longer bear their own image, they destroy the mirror. History repeats that pattern endlessly. From the trial of Socrates to modern whistleblowers, reformers, and dissidents who reveal more than the powerful wish to see. Yet the enduring appeal of the mirror lies in its restraint. It proves that power does not always require domination. Sometimes it requires patience and the refusal to yield to spectacle. The quiet observer who understands reflection can manipulate outcomes more effectively than the loud commander who believes he shapes reality by force. To master this law is to recognize that human beings live inside narratives, and that the surest way to dismantle a narrative is to make its owner watch it unfold without interference. Reflection is not peace, it is precision. It does not forgive, it exposes. It leaves the opponent standing in the open, weapon still in hand, suddenly uncertain whom he was aiming at all along. Every law of power carries its inverse. The mirror that disarms others can also turn back on its wielder. To use reflection effectively, you must understand the hazards that accompany it, the slow corrosion of empathy, the temptation toward mockery, and the violence that emerges when exposure replaces understanding. Socrates, Diogenes, and Gandhi all discovered that clarity breeds hostility. Each was eventually punished not for what he did, but for what he revealed. That pattern deserves examination because the same dynamic repeats in every age. People kill mirrors more eagerly than they kill enemies. 1. The burden of stillness. To reflect another's behavior demands emotional restraint beyond ordinary capacity. It requires suppressing the natural impulse to defend, explain, or retaliate. The more you practice it, the more detached you appear, and detachment, though useful, isolates. Socrates' calm infuriated his accusers precisely because it denied them the satisfaction of conflict. They mistook his serenity for arrogance, his patience for manipulation. The first danger of the mirror effect is therefore misinterpretation. The observer becomes the target simply because he refuses to perform outrage. Over time, constant reflection can also hollow the practitioner. To mirror others too long is to risk absorbing them. If you spend your life returning the world's gestures, you may forget which expressions are truly yours. This is the psychological fatigue that afflicts diplomats, therapists, negotiators, and leaders who live by restraint. The very composure that protects them also distances them from genuine emotion. The mirror becomes not a tool, but a wall. 2. The escalation of exposure. The second danger lies in success. When reflection works, it humiliates. The opponent sees himself revealed and, rather than correcting the flaw, seeks to destroy the evidence. Diogenes understood this and turned it to advantage. He made ridicule his armor. But most cannot live that way. Exposure breeds vengeance. A rival publicly unmasked will not reform. He will retaliate. History's reformers often misjudge this stage. They imagine revelation ends the conflict when in truth it begins it. If you use the mirror to win arguments, expect isolation. If you use it to alter institutions, expect persecution. Gandhi accepted that risk deliberately. His method depended on it. He knew the mirror would provoke brutality because brutality was the proof he needed. But few possess his tolerance for suffering. Those who imitate his restraint without his endurance collapse when violence arrives. 3. Counter mirrors. The only true defense against reflection is self-awareness. A man who already recognizes his own contradictions cannot be disarmed by their exposure. This is why tyrants fear honest advisors more than rebels. Self-knowledge weakens illusions, and illusion is the foundation of control. To counter someone using the mirror effect, You must remove his neutrality. Force him to reveal emotion, opinion, or need. Once he reacts, he ceases to reflect. The powerful instinctively develop such counter-mirrors. They accuse the questioner of hypocrisy, drag him into moral equivalence, or provoke emotional outburst. The method is crude but effective. Socrates' judges framed his calm as corruption. Diogenes' critics painted his independence as madness. Gandhi's opponents labeled his resistance a form of manipulation. Each accusation served the same function: to re-establish a symmetry, to make the mirror seem distorted so that the audience stops trusting its reflection. In modern settings, the same dynamic operates in quieter ways. Public figures confronted with evidence of deceit respond not with silence but with noise, flooding the space with new narratives until the reflection blurs. Organizations facing scandal commission inquiries release statements and perform transparency until the public grows tired. The mirror effect works only when the audience still believes what it sees. Once doubt replaces clarity, the spell breaks. 4. The ethics of exposure. Reflection, though subtle, is not neutral. It carries moral weight because it deals in humiliation. To hold a mirror is to decide what others must confront. If used carelessly, it becomes cruelty disguised as honesty. Ridicule can enlighten, but it can also destroy the fragile without enlightening the strong. Power rooted in exposure must therefore be measured. The goal is not to annihilate the other, but to make illusion impossible. Socrates used questions to guide others toward recognition, not ridicule. Diogenes sought liberation from hypocrisy, not spectacle for its own sake. Gandhi aimed at redemption of oppressor and oppressed alike. Their restraint separates them from lesser imitators who mistake cynicism for insight. To mirror ethically is to act without hatred. Hatred bends the mirror. It turns reflection into projection. 5. The strategic discipline to master Law 44 requires tempering revelation with timing. Reflection is most powerful when the subject still believes he controls the image. Reveal too soon, and he resists. Reveal too late, and the moment passes. In statecraft, this means patience. Let corruption grow visible to all before naming it. In negotiation, it means waiting until the opponent's logic circles back upon itself before summarizing it aloud. In private conflict, it means withholding reaction until emotion has spent itself, then speaking in the calm that follows. The mirror punishes haste. Discipline also means knowing when to stop. Every mirror must eventually be turned face down. Prolonged exposure breeds despair. There is a difference between revealing truth and trapping someone inside it. Gandhi understood this intuitively. After independence, he sought reconciliation, not revenge. The mirror had done its work. To keep holding it would have served vanity, not justice. 6. The enduring lesson. Reflection endures because it touches something fundamental in human psychology: the hunger to be seen and the terror of being truly seen. Power oscillates between those poles. The ruler, the celebrity, the ideologue, each demands recognition yet fears accuracy. That tension creates the space where Law 44 operates. When you mirror a person or institution perfectly, you remove the possibility of pretense. In that moment, authority must confront itself or collapse. The modern world multiplies mirrors endlessly: screens, surveillance, public opinion, but few are clear. Most distort to flatter or to condemn. True reflection remains rare because it requires human discipline, not technology. It demands the quiet intelligence to observe without decoration. That intelligence, once cultivated, becomes an instrument sharper than any rhetoric or weapon. To master this law is therefore to master presence. It is to stand amid conflict without heat, to watch others define themselves, to allow time to do the work violence cannot. It is not glamorous, it wins no applause. But history remembers those who practiced it because their victories outlast spectacle. Socrates, Diogenes, Gandhi, three men separated by centuries, united by a single craft, the ability to make the world look at itself and flinch. In the end, every contest of power resolves not in force but in recognition. One side finally sees too much. That instant of realization, silent, devastating, irreversible, is the mirror's final act. It leaves no scars on the victor, only reflection in the defeated, and from that reflection new illusions will soon begin to grow, waiting for the next hand steady enough to hold the glass again. Every age rediscovers the mirror. Sometimes it takes the shape of a thinker who asks too many questions. Sometimes a rebel who refuses to play the game. Sometimes a leader who forces an empire to face itself. The method changes form, but the principle never dies. People can live with injustice longer than they can live with exposure. That is why the mirror remains history's quietest weapon. To hold one requires strength of a different kind. It asks for restraint when anger would feel easier, for patience when impulse demands speed, for clarity when noise surrounds you. It is a discipline of observation rather than domination. To reflect others truthfully, you must first strip away your own vanity. The cloudy mirror reveals nothing. This is the paradox of the law. You gain influence only after surrendering the desire to display it. Look closely at those who mastered the craft. Socrates dismantled pride not through power but through the absence of power. He stood unarmed in a city of arguments and left men speechless. Diogenes tore apart hypocrisy by refusing to compete for status. His poverty became a form of superiority. Gandhi confronted empire by mirroring its conscience until that conscience could no longer look at itself. Each seemed weak in appearance, yet their restraint forced adversaries far stronger than themselves to fracture under self-recognition. They understood that truth spoken is contested, but truth reflected is undeniable. In the centuries since, their lesson has migrated into quieter arenas. Diplomats now use it across tables polished to a mirror's sheen, journalists in interviews that let the subject's words condemn themselves. Ordinary people in personal disputes where silence reveals more than argument. Everywhere the law repeats itself. Whoever can hold composure longer controls the frame of reality. It is not eloquence that wins. It is equilibrium. The danger, as always, lies in pride. Those who discover the effectiveness of reflection are tempted to wield it for cruelty, to expose, to humiliate, to enjoy the spectacle of collapse. But the mirror punishes vanity on both sides. Once it becomes a tool for ridicule rather than understanding, it distorts, and distortion breaks the very law it depends on. The aim is not destruction but clarity, to make deception impossible, not to make people small. The modern world offers endless surfaces, screens, feeds, profiles where everyone performs and no one truly reflects. Noise replaces silence. Confession replaces understanding. Amid that flood, the genuine mirror has become rare again. Those who can restore it through calm, patience, and discipline will always seem dangerous because they reintroduce honesty into environments built on performance. Power recoils from that kind of honesty. It cannot control the gaze that does not blink. Law 44 is not a call to gentleness. It is a strategy of precision. To reflect is to strike without motion. It is to let others destroy themselves by confronting what they are. It requires less energy than argument and more courage than aggression. For the mirror exposes everyone who holds it too. You cannot wield it without glimpsing your own reflection somewhere in the glass. In the end, the lesson is simple and merciless. The world will always attack what forces it to see itself. Yet without those attacks, illusion would harden into permanence and truth would disappear. Someone must hold the mirror. Someone must stand still while the noise rages. That stillness is not weakness, it is the purest form of power. So remember what this law demands. Do not argue when you can reflect. Do not shout when silence will suffice. Do not perform when observation will expose more. Power that endures is power that reveals nothing of itself, yet reveals everything around it. Like, subscribe, comment on book, or don't. You are the master of your own life.